close your eyes and listen to the sound of a bell. It is not the bright rhythmic tolling that calls the faithful to a Sunday morning service, nor is it the frantic clashing alarm that warns of an approaching fire or an invading army. This bell is slow. It is heavy. It carries a hollow metallic resonance that seems to vibrate within the very marrow of your bones. It is a funeral knell, and it is ringing for you. You are standing in the center of the village square, and although your heart is beating and your lungs are pulling in the damp morning air, the world has already decided that you are dead. You are a leper. This is the moment your life as a human being ends and your existence as a ghost begins. The story of the medieval leper is not merely a tale of physical decay or medical ignorance. It is a descent into a living purgatory, a slow-motion exile from the world of the sun, the hearth, and the touch of a hand. To understand this journey, you must shed your modern sensibilities and step into a world where the lines between the physical and the spiritual are blurred, where a spot on the skin is seen as a mark of divine judgment or a horrific trial of the soul. It began so quietly that you almost missed it. Perhaps it was a morning much like any other, as you sat by the fire to pull on your woolen hose. You noticed a small patch of skin on your forearm that looked different. A pale, silvery blemish that seemed to shimmer unnaturally in the low light of the tallow candle. When you touched it, you felt nothing. You took a small needle from the sewing basket and pressed the sharp point into the center of the mark, pushing until the skin puckered and the steel sank deep. There was no pain. There was no flinch. There was only a terrifying, absolute silence from your own nerves. In that moment, the floor seemed to tilt beneath you. You knew what the neighbors whispered about. You knew the stories of the men and women who disappeared from the village, never to be spoken of again. You tried to hide it, wrapping your arm in extra layers of linen even in the heat of the summer harvest. But the disease is a patient and greedy master. Soon your eyebrows began to thin, and your voice took on a strange, rasping quality, as if your throat were filled with dry gravel. The people you had known since childhood began to look at you with eyes full of a new, sharp kind of fear. They did not see your face anymore. They saw a walking corpse, a vessel of contagion that threatened the safety of the entire parish. The day of your examination was the day the sky fell. You were taken before the local priest and a group of village elders, men who had once shared ale with you at the tavern, but who now stood 6 feet away, their hands covering their mouths with scented cloths. There were no doctors with microscopes here, no understanding of bacteria or nervous systems. There was only the ancient, terrifying law of the Book of Leviticus and the cold, practical necessity of the community. They looked at your skin, they listened to the rattle in your chest, and they pronounced the words that severed your soul from the land of the living. From that moment on, you were legally and spiritually dead. You were stripped of your right to inherit property, your right to sue in court, and your right to even step foot inside a common tavern or a marketplace. Your marriage, if you had one, was effectively dissolved, leaving your spouse a widow or widower while you still stood before them. The cruelty of the medieval world was not always born of malice, but of a desperate, clawing need for survival, in an age where pestilence could wipe out an entire valley in a single season. The ritual of separation, the separatio leprosorum, is a ceremony that would break the strongest of spirits. You are led to the parish church, the very building where you were baptized and where you expected one day to be mourned. But the mourning is happening now. You are draped in a heavy black funeral pall, the kind used to cover a coffin. You lie prostrate on the cold stone floor before the altar, while the priest chants the office of the dead. The air is thick with the smell of frankincense, and the damp, earthy scent of the old stones. You hear the words of the psalm, the Miserere, echoing off the high-vaulted ceiling, and every syllable feels like a hammer blow against your chest. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love. The community stands behind you in the shadows, their faces flickering in the candlelight, weeping not for your recovery, but for your soul. When the prayers are finished, the priest leads you out of the church and toward the cemetery. You are forced to stand in an open grave, the dark, moist earth pressing against your boots. The priest takes a shovel and drops 3 handfuls of dirt onto your feet, saying the words that still haunt the nightmares of the Middle Ages. Be dead to the world, but living again unto God. With those words, the transformation is complete. You are no longer a farmer, a smith, or a daughter. You are a thing. The priest hands you your new wardrobe, the uniform of the damned. It is a long, shapeless robe of coarse, grey wool that scratches against your sensitive skin. You are given a hood that shadows your face, hiding the progress of the scales and the sores from the delicate eyes of the healthy. Most importantly, you are handed the Lazarus bell, or perhaps a pair of wooden clappers. These are your new voice. From this day forward, you are forbidden from speaking to anyone unless you are downwind of them. You must announce your approach with a rhythmic clack, 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 or the lonely tolling of your bell, a warning to all that the walking death is near. If you wish to buy bread, you must point to it with a long wooden stick. Your hands must never touch anything that a healthy person might later handle. You are a ghost with a stomach that still hungers, a phantom with feet that still ache, and a man with a heart that still yearns for the warmth of a human embrace that you will never feel again. The walk from the church to the edge of the town is a journey of 1,000 miles contained within a few hundred yards. The streets you played in as a child are now forbidden territory. You see the tavern where the golden light of the hearth spills out into the twilight, and you smell the roasting meat and the fermented tang of the ale, but you cannot enter. You see your own home, the door shut tight, the windows dark. Perhaps you see your children watching from an upper story, their faces pressed against the glass. Or perhaps they have been told to turn their heads away. The social rules of the medieval period are absolute and unyielding. To touch a leper is to invite the wrath of God and the certain decay of the flesh. You are escorted to the town gates by the priest, who recites a list of prohibitions that sound like the laws of a different planet. You must not enter a narrow lane where you might brush against a passer-by. You must not wash your hands or your clothes in the common stream. You must not touch the posts of a bridge. You must not enter a church, a bakehouse, or a mill. Every step you take toward the horizon is a step away from the only world you have ever known. Beyond the gates lies the leper hospital, or the Lazar house. These institutions are often situated at the crossroads or just outside the city walls, positioned so that the inmates can beg from the travellers who pass by. As you approach, the first thing you notice is the sound. It is not the silence of a graveyard, but a cacophony of bells and clappers, a discordant symphony of the excluded. You see the others. Some are in the early stages, like you, their faces still holding the contours of their former lives. Others are further gone, their features eroded by the disease until they resemble the melting wax of a candle. There is a man whose nose has disappeared, leaving a dark triangular void in the center of his face. There is a woman whose fingers have curled into permanent, stiffened claws, making even the simplest task an agonizing struggle. This is your new family. These are the brothers and sisters of the Order of St. Lazarus. There is a strange, dark comfort in the sight of them, for in their eyes you do not see the terror that you saw in the village. You see only the weary recognition of a shared fate. The sun begins to set, casting long, distorted shadows across the overgrown path that leads to the hospital gates. The wind picks up, carrying the chill of the approaching night through the thin fabric of your grey robe. You look back one last time at the city walls, the stone battlements glowing orange in the dying light. You are 30 years old, or perhaps 20 or 40. You have decades of life ahead of you, but they are decades that will be spent in this shadow world, moving between the Lazar house and the roadside, waiting for the bells to toll for your physical end, as they have already tolled for your social one. You realize that you must learn a whole new set of skills: how to clean your sores with boiled wine, how to beg with dignity, and how to find God in the midst of a rotting body. The transition is violent, a tearing of the self that leaves you raw and bleeding. As the heavy wooden gates of the hospital creak open to receive you, you hear the distant sound of the village bells. Once more, finally falling silent. The world has finished with you. Your new life, if it can be called that, is just beginning. The heavy oak doors of the leper hospital groan shut behind you with a sound that signals the finality of a prison sentence. Inside, the air is thick and stagnant, smelling of old straw, sharp vinegar, and something sickly sweet that you soon realize is the scent of decaying flesh, masked by bundles of dried lavender and sage. Your first night within the walls of the Lazar house is not spent in prayer or reflection, but in a state of profound, numbing shock. You are led through a dim corridor, where the only light comes from narrow slits in the stone walls, casting long skeletal shadows across the floor. The master of the hospital, a man whose face is hidden deep within a cowl, speaks to you in a voice that is devoid of either pity or cruelty. He explains the rules of your new existence as if he is reciting the ledger of a merchant. You will rise before the sun. You will attend the first of many daily masses. You will labor in the garden if your limbs allow it. You will never, under any circumstances, leave the grounds without the express permission of the warden, and even then, only with your bell and your hood. You are given a small wooden bowl, a spoon, and a pallet of straw in a long dormitory, where the sounds of heavy, labored breathing and wet coughs fill the darkness like the rhythmic pulsing of a dying beast. As the weeks turn into months, the rhythm of the Lazar house becomes your entire world. You learn that this place is not merely a hospital, but a strange kind of monastery for the broken. There is a rigid hierarchy here, governed by the severity of the disease and the length of time one has managed to survive it. At the top are those whose bodies are still mostly intact, the ones who can still fetch water, scrub the stone floors, and tend to the vegetable patches that provide the thin pottage you eat twice a day. At the bottom are the bedridden, the souls whose faces have been worn away by the slow tide of the infection until they are unrecognizable as human beings. You see them lying in the shadows of the infirmary, their eyes wide and staring, their mouths frozen in a permanent silent cry. You realize with a jolt of terror that they are your future. You watch the way the others move, the slow and deliberate shuffle of people who are trying to preserve what little energy they have left. Every action is calculated. Every step is a negotiation with a body that is slowly becoming a stranger to you. The physical progression of the disease is a slow and agonizing betrayal. One morning, you wake to find that the silver patch on your arm has spread, and the skin around your eyes has become thick and furrowed, giving you the lion-like appearance that the villagers spoke of with such dread. You spend hours staring at your reflection in a bucket of water, watching the person you used to be slip away day by day. You lose the ability to feel the cold of the morning air on your hands, which sounds like a blessing, until you realize that you have also lost the ability to feel the warmth of the sun or the texture of the bread you hold. You accidentally brush your hand against a hot iron pot in the kitchen, and you do not realize you have been burned until you see the blister rising on your skin and smell the singed hair. This lack of pain is perhaps the most terrifying part of all. It is as if your body is dying in sections, retreating from the world of sensation, while your mind remains trapped inside, a prisoner in a crumbling fortress. You begin to understand why the priest said you were dead to the world. You are experiencing the decomposition of the grave while your heart still beats. Spiritual life in the hospital is an oppressive, constant presence. The Church teaches that leprosy is the sacred disease, the elephantiasis of the soul made visible. You are told that your suffering on this earth is a special grace from God, a way to purge your sins and ensure a swift passage through purgatory. You are called the beloved of God, a living martyr who carries the cross of Christ in your very flesh. However, it is hard to feel beloved when your nose begins to collapse and your voice turns into a guttural croak. You spend hours on your knees in the chapel, the stone cold against your shins, praying for a miracle that you know will not come. You pray not for healing, but for the strength to endure the smell of your own rot. You watch the healthy brothers who run the hospital, the ones who have taken vows to care for the sick, and you see the way they hold their breath when they come near you. You see the way they use long tongs to hand you your clothes or your medicine. They talk of your holiness, but they treat you like a venomous snake. The contradiction is a bitter pill to swallow, and you find yourself wondering if the God they speak of is watching you with love or with a terrible divine curiosity. Begging is the primary occupation for those who are still mobile. 3 times a week, you are permitted to stand by the Great North Road, the main artery that carries travellers, merchants and pilgrims toward the capital city. You wear your grey robe and your deep hood, and you hold your clappers in hands that are now permanently wrapped in linen bandages to hide the sores. You stand 10 paces back from the road as the law demands, and you begin the rhythmic clacking that announces your presence. It is a lonely, haunting sound that cuts through the birdsong and the rustle of the leaves, clack, 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 unclean, unclean. You hold out your wooden bowl on the end of a long ash pole, and you wait. The reactions of the travellers are a theatre of human emotion. Some people see you and immediately cross to the other side of the road, their faces pale with a primal, instinctive fear. Others throw a copper coin into your bowl from a distance, refusing to look you in the eye, as if your gaze alone could transmit the plague. A few, the truly pious or the truly desperate, will stop and offer a prayer or a piece of salt pork, their voices trembling with a mixture of pity and horror. You learn to read the footsteps of the world, the heavy, confident stride of a knight, the hurried patter of a servant, the weary trudge of a peasant. To them, you are a landmark, a warning, a memento mori in the flesh. The social rules within the hospital are just as strict as those outside. You are part of a community of the damned, and like any community, there are disputes and friendships. You form a bond with a man named Thomas, a former stonemason who lost his livelihood when his hands began to fail him. In the evenings when the bells have stopped ringing and the candles are low, you sit together in the corner of the yard and talk about the lives you left behind. He tells you about the cathedrals he helped build, the way the stone felt under his chisel, and the pride he took in the soaring arches of the nave. You tell him about the smell of the earth after a spring rain and the sound of your mother singing in the kitchen. These memories are your most precious possessions, but they are also your most painful burdens. To remember the world of the healthy is to feel the weight of your exile all the more heavily. You avoid looking at each other too closely, for to see the progress of the disease on a friend is to see your own reflection in a cruel mirror. When Thomas eventually loses his sight, you become his eyes, describing the colour of the sunset and the flight of the crows over the fields, until the day his voice also fails, and he becomes just another silent shape on a straw pallet. Daily life is a constant struggle against the environment. The Lazar house is perpetually damp, and the cold of the winter months seeps into your bones, making your stiffened joints ache with a dull, throbbing intensity. There is never enough wood for the fire, and the food is often maggoty or sour. You learn to supplement your diet with wild herbs and berries, gathered from the small patch of woods within the hospital walls, and you learn the medicinal properties of the plants that grow in the cracks of the stone. You make poultices of yarrow and plantain to soothe the open ulcers on your legs, and you chew on willow bark to dull the constant headache that plagues you. There are no doctors here, only the traditional knowledge passed down from one generation of lepers to the next. You become a scholar of your own decay, observing the way the skin changes colour, and the way the muscles wither away until the bone is visible beneath the surface. You find a strange, detached interest in the process, a way to distance your mind from the physical reality of what is happening to you. You are a scientist studying a specimen, even if that specimen is your own dying body. As the second year of your banishment begins, you realize that you have forgotten what it feels like to be touched. The lack of human contact is a hollow ache in the center of your chest that never goes away. You crave the simple sensation of a hand on your shoulder, a hug, or even a handshake. In the Lazar house, touch is only ever clinical or accidental. You are handled with sticks, with tongs, and with gloves. You are a biological hazard, a source of impurity that must be contained at all costs. This sensory deprivation starts to change the way you think. You begin to feel less like a human and more like a ghost, a spirit that is lingering on the edges of the living world without being a part of it. You watch the birds flying over the walls, and you envy their freedom, their ability to touch the trees and the water without fear of contaminating them. You are a prisoner of your own skin, locked away in a fortress of grey wool and stone, waiting for the final liberation that only death can provide. But death is slow in coming to the leper. The disease does not kill quickly. It dismantles you piece by piece, leaving the vital organs until the very end. as if it wants you to witness every moment of your own destruction. The final years of your exile are defined by a narrowing of the world until it consists of nothing more than the 4 damp stone walls of the hospital infirmary and the small rectangular patch of grey sky you can see through a high, narrow window. The disease has finally claimed your sight, leaving you in a permanent, flickering twilight where shapes are merely darker shadows against a pale background. You no longer walk to the road to beg. Your feet have become heavy, insensitive weights that can no longer support the remains of your frame. You lie upon your pallet of straw, which has been packed down until it is as hard as the earth itself. The sounds of the hospital, once so sharp and terrifying, have become a dull, distant hum. You hear the rhythmic clacking of the wooden clappers from the new arrivals, and the sound does not bring you sorrow any more. It only brings a weary, fraternal recognition. You are the elder now, a veteran of a war that has no victors. As your body reaches the end of its long, slow dissolution, your mind begins to drift backward, crossing the forbidden boundaries of the city walls you left so long ago. You find yourself standing once more in the golden fields of the harvest, the sun warm on a face that is not yet broken. You feel the weight of a scythe in your hands and the rough, honest texture of the wheat. These memories are more real to you than the cold broth that the brothers pressed to your lips. You realize that while the world tried to kill you while you were still breathing, they could not touch the sanctuary of your internal life. The social rules, the bells, the grey robes, and the isolation were all designed to strip you of your humanity. Yet, in the quiet darkness of your final days, you feel a strange, fragile sense of peace. You have endured a trial that would have broken the saints themselves, and you are still here, a conscious spark in the center of a failing machine. The end comes on a night when the frost is thick on the window ledge. Your breathing, which has been a wet, rattling struggle for weeks, begins to slow. There is no priest to perform the office of the dead this time, for it was already performed years ago. You are already dead in the eyes of the law, the church, and the state. There is only a fellow sufferer, a man whose name you never learned, who sits by your side and holds your bandaged hand in his own. It is the first time you have felt the warmth of another human being in a decade, and the sensation is so overwhelming that it feels like a physical light in the darkness. You do not need words to communicate. In that final, quiet contact, all the loneliness and the bitterness of your banishment seem to dissolve. You are not a leper, you are not a ghost, and you are not a curse. You are simply a man, and you are finally going home. When your heart stops, there is no great mourning in the village. The people there have forgotten your name, and your children have grown into adults who tell stories of a father who died a lifetime ago. The brothers of the hospital carry your body out to the small, crowded cemetery behind the chapel. There is no coffin, for wood is a luxury the damned cannot afford. You are wrapped in the same grey woolen robe that you wore in life, and you are lowered into the earth. As the first shovelful of dirt hits the fabric, the cycle is finally complete. The earth that was sprinkled on your feet at the church years ago now covers you entirely. You are no longer a source of fear or a lesson in morality. You are part of the soil, part of the wind, and finally, mercifully, free from the skin that was your prison. The bells of the village may not ring for you today, but the silence that follows is the most beautiful sound you have ever heard.